Hello everyone, it's Scott and we're back for Tuesday's Final Fantasy previews. We've got a bunch of cards to talk about today, but before we dive in, remember to like and subscribe to get further content like this throughout Final Fantasy preview season and beyond. And again, if you're looking for cards from the set, you can check us out at caffeinatedgamers.tcgplayerpro.com. So let's dive into today's previews. So first we've got From Father to Son. For 1 and a white mana, you get a sorcery, and you get to search your library for a vehicle card, reveal it, and put it into your hand. If the spell was cast from a graveyard, put that card onto the battlefield instead, then shuffle. So definitely a playable card in Standard. We haven't seen many vehicles from this set, but we know that from Ether Drift we got a lot of good vehicles. So this is a good way to get those cards into your hand, and then potentially late in the game get something back from the graveyard that can change the course of the game. Next is Edgar, King of Figaro. For 4 and 2 blue mana, you can legendary creature that's a human artificer noble and is a 4/5. And when Edgar enters, draw a card for each artifact you control in two-headed coin. The first time you flip one or more coins each turn, those coins come up heads and you win those flips. So interesting ability there. You know, we haven't had any coin flipping or anything like that in a while in Standard, but it's possible that we're going to see some cards that do have that ability on it. So that'll be interesting to see what those cards do for us. Now, Edgar's ability to draw cards for each artifact you control, I think that's going to make this Standard playable, because if you're playing the Simulacrum Synthesizer deck, this is a way you play a couple copies of this, you play it in the late game, and it refills your hand with all the things that you want to be able to play. Next, we've got a summon spell for the day, and it's Summon Titan. For 3 and 2 green mana. You get an enchantment creature that's a Saga Giant. He's a 7/7 with reach and trample. On Chapter 1, you mill 5 cards. On Chapter 2, you return all land cards from your graveyard to the battlefield tapped. And then on Chapter 3, until end of turn, another target creature you control gains trample and gets +X/+X, where X is the number of land cards you control. Alright, so this is a card that I think we'll see Standard play. We've had a landfall deck previously in Standard that saw some play for a while, and we know we've got a couple of good landfall cards from this set. So I think Summon Titan could be kind of a top-end card in those decks, where you're going to be able to mill some additional lands into your graveyard, and then you'll be able to return all those lands on Chapter 2, and then get the added benefit of any landfall triggers with Nissa that you might get, giving you a ton of mana to spend. And obviously on that second turn you're going to be able to attack with Titan, and then on Chapter 3 you're going to be able to give any one of your creatures, you know, +X/+X equal to the number of lands you control, which is a really powerful ability. So I think this is definitely something that will be slotted in to our landfall deck. Next, we've got Joshua Phoenix's Dominant. For 1, a red and a white mana, you get a legendary creature that's a human noble wizard and is a 3/4. And when Joshua enters, discard up to 2 cards, then draw that many card. So kind of a typical red ability that you see in Standard. And then for 3, a red and a white mana, you can tap Joshua and then exile Joshua, then return it to the battlefield transformed under its owner's control. Activate only as a sorcery, and when you do, you get Phoenix, Warden of Fire, which is a legendary enchantment creature, Saga Phoenix, with flying and lifelink, and is a 4/4. On Chapter 1, Rising Flames, you get the Phoenix deals 2 damage to each opponent on Chapters 1 and 2. And then on Chapter 3, return any number of target creature cards with total mana value 6 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield, and exile Phoenix, then return it to the battlefield face up. So I think this is a card that definitely is positioned well to see some Standard play, because basically you put this in a deck where you are playing a lot of small creatures, and when those things die, that's okay, because you know that once you get to 5 mana, you can transform Joshua and then go ahead and get Phoenix. And you know in 2 turns those cards are going to come back to you because you're going to be able to, with Flames of Rebirth, get mana value 6 worth of 6 mana values worth of creatures back from the graveyard. So I think, as long as Joshua can survive, a turn or 2 on the field, then I think this is, a reasonable card to see play in Standard. Next, we've got our rest of the crystal cycle. So the first is the Wind Crystal for 2 and 2 white mana. You get a legendary artifact, and white spells you cast cost 1 less to cast. If you would gain life, you gain twice that much life instead. And for 4 and 2 white mana, you can tap this, and creatures you control gain flying and lifelink until end of turn. So really powerful abilities on this. I don't know if it's going to see Standard play because we already have a lifelink deck in Standard that's in white, and there's a ley line that goes with that deck that doesn't really see play. But the possibility of playing this and then reducing the cost of some of your white spells, I think gives it some Standard playability. Next, we've got the Water Crystal for 2 and 2 blue mana. You get a legendary artifact, and again, blue spells you cast cost 1 less to cast. If an opponent would mill 1 or more cards, they mill that many cards plus 4 instead. And for 4 and 2 blue mana, you can tap it, and each opponent mills cards equal to the number of cards in their hand. So I think this definitely will slot into the mill deck. First of all, it's going to reduce the cost of your blue spells, but this is just another mill outlet that deck is needing to really push mill as a viable strategy in Standard. So I think this definitely will be part of that deck. I don't know if it's 4 copies of this, but I think 2, maybe 3 copies easily slot into the mill deck, and hopefully that kind of gives it enough that it can actually win some games. Next, we've got the Fire Crystal for 2 and 2 red mana. You get a legendary artifact, and red spells you cast cost 1 less to cast. Creatures you control have haste, which is a really powerful ability on this. That ability to reduce costs, and then all of your red creatures or your creatures in general getting haste is a very powerful ability in Standard. And then for 4 and 2 red mana, you can tap it and create a token that's a copy of target creature you control. Sacrifice it at the beginning of the next end step. So this is a way, for 6 mana, if you don't have anything to do on that turn, you can create a copy of the best creature you have on the battlefield. I think reasonable. Now, is this going to see Standard play in mono red decks? I don't think so, as the aggro deck is currently established. But if we do have a red mid-range deck or a Gruul mid-range deck, then I think this is a good card for that because of that ability to give everything haste. Next, we've got the Earth Crystal for 2 and 2 green mana. You get a legendary artifact. Green spells you cast cost 1 less to cast. And if 1 or more +1/+1 counter would be put on a creature you control, twice that many +1/+1 counters are put on that creature instead. And for 4 and 2 green mana, you can tap it and distribute 2 +1/+1 counters among 1 or 2 target creatures you control. So again, this is the question is, does green want this? And we do have a +1/+1 counter deck that sees some play in Standard. So I think in that deck, the ability to reduce the cost of those green spells and then double down on your +1/+1 counters might get a copy or 2 of it in that deck. Alright, moving on to some lower rarity cards for the day. Our first is Torgal, a Fine Hound for 1 and a green mana. You get a legendary creature, that's a wolf and a 2/2. And when you cast your first human creature spell each turn, that creature enters with an additional +1/+1 counter on it for each dog and or wolf you control, and you can tap Torgal for 1 mana of any color. So I think this is a card that will see Standard play, particularly in a Legends Matters deck when we know we already got Sarah, who will help reduce the cost of legendary spells the first time you cast them. So this, I think, fits right into that deck. It's a mana dork, but what it also is going to do is every time you're casting a human, you're going to get at least 1+1/+1 counter on that. And I would expect to see some more dogs and woofs that would matter to us in that style of deck. Next, we've got Blam T-Rexor for 4 and 2 green mana. You get a dinosaur, that's a 6/6 with trample, and when this creature enters, you gain 3 life, and it has 4 cycling for 2. This will be a good card in limited, definitely, but probably won't see any standard play. Next, we've got Gaius Van Balasar for 2 and 2 black mana. You get a legendary creature that's a human soldier and is a 3/2. And when Gaius Van Balasar enters the battlefield, you get to choose one. Each player sacrifices a creature token of their choice. Each player sacrifices a non-creature token of their choice, or each player sacrifices an enchantment of their choice. So I think this is definitely going to see standard play as a sideboard card, if nothing else, because the ability to force your opponent to sacrifice an enchantment, or if they're playing, a deck where they're playing just big creatures, well, you can force them to sacrifice one of those creatures when it comes into play. So that the flexibility of this card, I think, feels to me like this is definitely going to be standard playable. All right, on to some white cards for the day, and the first is Ambrosia Whiteheart for 1 and a white mana. You get a legendary creature that's a bird and is a 2/2 with flash. And when Ambrosia Whiteheart enters the battlefield, you may return another target permanent you control to its owner's hand. And it also has landfall. Whenever a land you control enters the battlefield, Ambrosia Whiteheart gets +1 until end of turn. So this is that ability. If you can bring a bunch of lands into play on one turn, this will go nuts with the +1 or +1 to the power of Ambrosia. Now, Ambrosia is not a flyer, which kind of sucks, but that's okay. Because this, in my mind, in the Orzhov bounce deck or the Esper bounce deck, is just another card that fits into those decks. And this is definitely going to see standard play. How many copies of this card those decks are going to want, I'm not sure. But this is definitely going to make the Orzhov version of that a little bit stronger, because now you're going to have 3 cards that can bounce things. Next, we've got Dwarven Castle Guard for 1 and a white mana. You get a dwarf soldier, that's a 2/1, and when this creature dies, create a 1/1 colorless hero creature token. Good card in limited, probably won't see any standard play, but a good card in limited because it replaces itself on the battlefield with that hero token. Next, we've got Crystal Fragments for 1 white mana. You get an artifact, that's an equipment. Equipped creature gets +1/+1, and the equip cost is 1. And then for 5 and 2 white mana, you can exile this equipment, then return it to the battlefield transformed under its owner's control, and activate only as a sorcery. And then when you do, you get Summon Alexander, who's an enchantment creature, Saga Construct, and is a 4/3 with flying. And on chapter 1, you get to prevent all damage that would be dealt to creatures you control this turn. And that happens on chapter 2 as well. So basically, you're going to be able to attack, and your opponent won't do any combat damage to your players, your creatures that are on the field. And then on chapter 3, tap all creatures your opponent controls. So I think this is in the late game, this is going to be a very powerful card in standard and in potentially other formats, because you transform this before combat, and then after that, your opponent can't damage any of your creatures for not only this combat, but the next combat as well. And then on the third combat, then all of their creatures are going to be tapped, and you're just going to be able to attack through with your entire team, and hopefully by then win the game. Next, we've got Magic Tech Armor for 3 and a white mana. You get an artifact vehicle, that's a 4/4, and when this vehicle enters the battlefield, you get to create a 1/1 colorless hero creature token, and the crew cost is 1. So it's creating the creature to crew it, which I think makes this playable. Certainly in Limited, this is going to be a playable Magic card. If we do get a vehicles deck, maybe this could work in that deck as well. But I'm thinking this is probably more a limited card than a standard card. Next, we have our last card of the day, Lionheart for 4 mana. You get an artifact equipment, and when this equipment enters the battlefield, it deals 2 damage to any target, and then equipped creature gets +2/+1, and the equip cost is 2. Maybe in Limited I would play this, but I don't think this is standard playable because it's going to cost you 6 mana to get Lionheart attached to a creature, and it's only giving that creature +2/+1, which really isn't enough to see standard play. Alright, those are Tuesday's Final Fantasy preview cards. Thanks for staying to the end of the video. Leave a comment for me as well as what you liked from today's card previews, and I've put here for you a link to all my Final Fantasy preview videos. Thanks for staying to the end of the video, and I will be back tomorrow with more Final Fantasy previews. Thanks. I'll see you next time.